The air at Sterling Heights High didn't smell like floor wax and old sandwiches. It smelled like expensive espresso, Joe Malone sea salt perfume, and the silent, vibrating hum of high-stakes anxiety. We didn't just attend school, we occupied a brand. To the outside world, Sterling Heights was the crown jewel of the state, a Gothic revival fortress that churned out Ivy League legacies and Olympic-bound athletes with the clinical precision of a Swiss watch. But inside those ivy-covered walls, we were all holding our breath, waiting for the first crack in the glass. At the center of our solar system was Maya Vance. If Sterling Heights was a brand, Maya was its flagship product. She was the kind of girl who managed to look refreshed after a 4-hour sleep deficit and a double-period AP Physics lab. She didn't just have a 4.5 GPA, she had a way of making you feel like your 3.8 was a personal tragedy she was too polite to mention. I remember watching her on the morning of the Winter Gala, our school's version of the Met Gala but with more collegiate scouting. She was standing in the quad, her golden hair caught in the crisp December sunlight, laughing at something the principal had said. Next to her was Julian Thorne, the boy whose family name was literally etched into the library's cornerstone. Together, they looked like a propaganda poster for the American dream. They look like they're made of porcelain, I whispered to myself. More like reinforced carbon fiber, my friend Leo muttered, adjusting his glasses. Leo was a scholarship kid, a tech genius who lived in the shadows of the server room. Hard to break, but once they do, they shatter into a million jagged pieces. I didn't know then how prophetic he was. I just knew that Maya represented everything we were told to want: total control, effortless excellence, and a future that was already written in gold leaf. The pressure at Sterling Heights wasn't loud, it was a low-frequency white noise that followed you home. We were the circle of excellence, a curated group of the top 10%. To stay in the circle, you didn't just work hard, you performed. Every extracurricular was a calculated move on a chessboard. Every volunteer hour was documented and notarized. The teachers weren't just educators, they were curators of our potential. Principal Sterling, a man who wore suits that cost more than my father's car, often spoke about the Sterling Standard. "We do not produce students," he would say during assembly, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "We produce leaders. And leaders do not have the luxury of mediocrity." Behind the scenes, however, the Sterling Standard felt like a noose. I had seen kids crying in the bathroom over an A-. I had seen Maya Vance herself staring at a chemistry test with a look of such raw, naked terror that it made my stomach flip. But the moment she felt eyes on her, the mask would snap back into place, perfect, polished, and impenetrable. The Winter Gala was held in the Grand Ballroom, a space of marble floors and velvet drapes that made us feel like royalty rather than 17-year-olds. The theme was A Night in the Clouds, and the room was filled with dry ice and blue spotlights. Maya was, predictably, the star. She wore a dress of shimmering silver that made her look like a celestial being. She and Julian danced the first dance, a choreographed display of grace that made the parents in the balcony beam with pride. It was the peak of the Sterling Heights myth. We were the best. We were the brightest. We were untouchable. Around 10:30 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. It didn't happen with a scream or a crash. It happened with a ping. Then another. And another. A wave of blue light washed over the room as hundreds of students simultaneously pulled out their phones. The DJ's bass was still thumping, but the dance floor began to stagnate. People stopped mid-twirl. Maya, standing near the punch bowl, looked down at her clutch. I pulled out my own phone. A notification from an encrypted, anonymous sender, the price of admission, click to view. I clicked. It wasn't a gossip blog. It wasn't a leaked video of a party. It was a directory of folders, organized by name. Vance, M, Thorne, J, Blackwood, C. All the names of the circle of excellence were there. I tapped on Maya's folder. Inside were PDFs of essays she had written, except the metadata showed they had been created by a professional writing service in London. There were receipts for consultation fees paid to a proctor for the sets. There were voice memos of Julian Thorne discussing how much his father had paid to adjust his transcript for the Harvard application. The ugly truth wasn't just that they were cheating. It was the scale of it. It was a business. A cold, calculated transaction where money bought the sterling standard. The music finally stopped when the DJ, a senior named Mike, looked at his own phone and forgot to hit the next track. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Everyone looked at Maya. The silver dress didn't look celestial anymore, it looked like tinfoil. Her face, usually so composed, was drained of all color. She looked at Julian, but he was staring at his phone, his jaw working silently. Then, the murmurs started. It wasn't just the outsiders like Leo and me who were looking. It was everyone. The kids who had actually stayed up until 3 a.m. studying, the kids whose parents couldn't afford consultation fees, the kids who had been told they weren't sterling material because their grades weren't as perfect as Maya's. Principal Sterling stepped onto the stage, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Everyone, please put your devices away. This is clearly a malicious prank, a cyber attack on our community." "It's not a prank," someone yelled from the back. It was a girl named Sarah, who had lost her spot in the top 10 to Julian Thorne by a fraction of a point. "My dad doesn't have $50,000 to donate to the registrar, Mr. Sterling. Is that why I'm at rank 11? The room erupted. The veneer hadn't just cracked, the entire glass pedestal had shattered, and the shards were sharp enough to draw blood. Maya Vance didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned and walked out of the ballroom, the click of her heels on the marble sounding like a countdown. As she passed me, I saw her eyes. For the first time, she didn't look like an icon. She looked like a girl who had been drowning for years and had finally hit the bottom. The Winter Gala was over. The scandal had begun. And Sterling Heights High would never, ever be the same. The weekend between the Winter Gala and Monday morning was a fever dream of blue light and buzzing vibrations. Nobody slept. How could we? The price of admission link hadn't been taken down, instead, it had mirrored itself across dozens of private servers, Reddit threads, and encrypted cloud drives. It was like a digital hydra cut off one head, and two more appeared, spitting out spreadsheets and scanned bank statements. By 7:30 a.m. on Monday, Sterling Heights High didn't look like an elite preparatory academy. It looked like a fortress under siege. The usual morning ritual, the parade of luxury SUVs, the smell of artisanal lattes, the effortless laughter of the circle of excellence had been replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Students didn't walk in groups anymore. They walked alone, heads down, thumbs scrolling frantically. The school's private security guards, usually there to keep out unauthorized visitors, now seemed more like they were there to prevent a riot from breaking out within the student body. I stood by my locker, watching the entrance. I felt like an observer at a slow-motion car crash. Then, the heavy oak doors swung open, and the room went cold. Maya Vance walked in. She wasn't wearing her usual designer blazer. She was in a plain gray hoodie, her hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She looked smaller than she had on Saturday. Brittle. Behind her was Julian Thorne, looking like he hadn't slept since the Eisenhower administration. His jaw was set so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. As they walked down the main corridor, the crowd parted. It wasn't the respectful parting of the Red Sea we usually gave them. It was the way people move away from a biohazard. "Look at them," Leo whispered, appearing at my shoulder like a ghost. He looked energized, his eyes bright behind his glasses. "The gods have fallen, and the mortals are hungry for blood." "Did you do it, Leo?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. He didn't look at me. He just adjusted his backpack. Does it matter who pulled the trigger? The gun was already loaded. They loaded it themselves, one consultation fee at a time. To understand why the school was vibrating with such visceral rage, you had to look at the folders. Over the weekend, the digital bloodbath had been categorized and analyzed by every student with a functioning brain. It wasn't just cheating. Cheating is copying a math homework assignment. This was an industry. The ghostwriter directory. There were hundreds of emails between Maya Vance's mother and a boutique educational consulting firm in Boston. The firm didn't just give advice, they provided narrative architects. Every essay Maya had submitted since freshman year, essays about her deeply personal connection to volunteer work in South America, work she never actually did, had been written by a PhD candidate in English literature. The Proctor's Ledger. This was the most damaging. It contained a scanned ledger from a private testing center used by the Sterling elite. Beside Julian Thorne's name was a handwritten note, target score, 1,580. Fee, $25,000. Verified by Proctor S. It was a transaction. Julian hadn't outsmarted the SAT, his father had simply bought the answer key. The registrar's corrections. This folder contained internal memos from the school's own administrative office. It showed that several circle members had failing grades in AP Calculus and Physics that were magically adjusted to A- just before transcripts were sent to the Ivy League. The folders turned the school's meritocracy into a joke. The Sterling Standard was revealed to be nothing more than a price tag. In second period AP English, the tension was so thick you could have carved it with a knife. Miss Sterling, no relation to the principal, though she shared his rigid disposition, tried to start a discussion on The Great Gatsby. The irony was so thick it was nauseating. The theme of the American dream and the corruption of wealth, Miss Sterling began, but she was cut off. Sarah, the girl who had shouted at the gala, stood up. Her face was flushed, her eyes wet with tears of pure, unadulterated fury. She pointed directly at Julian Thorne, who was sitting in the back row, staring at a blank notebook. "Why are you even here, Julian?" Sarah's voice cracked. "My mother works 2 jobs to pay for my tutoring. I stayed up until 4 a.m. every night for 3 years to get a 1,550 on my SATs. And you just bought it? You took my spot at Yale. You stole it?" Julian didn't look up. "I didn't steal anything, Sarah. The world works a certain way. If your parents could have done it, they would have." The room exploded. 2 boys from the football team, guys who were usually Julian's best friends, stood up, but they weren't defending him. They looked disgusted. "We actually practiced," one of them growled. "We actually played the games. Were you buying your stats, too?" Miss Sterling slammed her book on the desk. "Settle down. Now." But the authority was gone. The teachers were part of the system that had allowed this. We all knew it. We had seen the registrar folder. We knew some of them had signed off on the grade changes. Every adult in the building was now a suspect. At 11 a.m., the bells chimed, signaling an unscheduled assembly. The Great Hall, where we had been dancing just 48 hours prior, felt like a funeral parlor. Principal Sterling stood at the mahogany lectern. He looked like he had aged a decade. The charismatic, untouchable leader of our factory for excellence was gone. In his place was a man trying to stop a dam from bursting with a handful of Scotch tape. "Students," he began, his voice amplified and echoing. "We are aware of the unauthorized distribution of private documents. I want to assure you that the Board of Trustees is launching a full investigation. We will maintain the integrity of Sterling Heights." "Integrity?" a voice shouted from the balcony. "You signed the grade changes, Sterling. We saw your digital signature." The principal faltered. "Those documents, they could be forged. In the age of AI, anything can be fabricated. Then show us the real ones. Another student yelled. Open the servers. Let a third party audit the grades. We will follow due process, Sterling snapped, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. In the meantime, anyone caught discussing or sharing these leaked files on school property will face immediate suspension. This is a matter of student privacy and it's a matter of fraud. Sarah yelled, standing on her chair. The assembly didn't end with a dismissal. It ended with the principal walking off the stage as the student body began to chant, "Leak the truth! Leak the truth!" After the assembly, I found Maya Vance in the library, tucked away in the very back of the stacks where the light didn't reach. She wasn't crying. She was just staring at a shelf of old leather-bound law books. "You should go home, Maya," I said, staying at a distance. "It's getting ugly out there." She turned to look at me. Her eyes were hollow. "Where would I go? My father is on the phone with 3 different law firms. My mother is hysterical because her legacy is ruined. They don't care that I cheated. They care that I got caught." "Did you do it?" I asked. "Did you write any of it? Any of the essays?" Maya let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "I tried. Freshman year, I wrote a paper on Macbeth. I worked on it for 3 weeks. My dad read it, laughed, and told me it was adequate for a state school. The next day, he handed me a flash drive with the real essay. I submitted it. I got an A+. After that, it just became easier to stop trying." She looked back at the books. "The worst part isn't that everyone hates me. The worst part is that I don't even know if I'm actually smart. I don't know who I am without the ghost writers." I wanted to feel sorry for her. I really did. But then I remembered the kids whose dreams she had stepped on to stay at the top. I remembered the price of admission. "You should have said no," I said softly. "In this school." She whispered. No wasn't an option on the curriculum. As I left the library, I ran into Leo again. He was leaning against a pillar, watching the chaos in the quad. Students were spray painting fraud on the statue of the school's founder. "It's working," Leo said, a smirk playing on his lips. "The school is falling apart, Leo. This isn't just about Maya and Julian anymore. It's the whole institution." "Exactly," Leo said. He pulled a small tablet from his bag and showed me a screen. It was a countdown timer. 4 hours 59 minutes and 51 seconds. "What happens when that hits 0? I asked. Leo looked at the principal's office across the quad. "The first leak was just the students. The circle of excellence. But like you said, they didn't do this alone. At 5 p.m., the second folder drops." "What's in the second folder?" Leo's eyes flashed with a cold, sharp light. "The faculty. The bribes paid to the principal. The donations for building the new athletic wing in exchange for passing grades. The first leak was the price of admission. The second one? That's the architecture of the lie. The digital bloodbath wasn't over. It was just getting started." The clock in the center of the Sterling Heights quad struck 5 with a heavy, metallic toll that felt more like a guillotine blade dropping than a time marker. For exactly 3 seconds, the campus was silent. Then, as if on cue, the collective gasp of 2,000 people echoed through the digital ether. The second folder, the architecture of the lie, had arrived. If the first leak was a grenade thrown into the student body, this was a bunker buster aimed at the very foundations of the school. It didn't just contain spreadsheets, it contained the soul of Sterling Heights, and it was black with rot. I was sitting in the back of the library with Leo when it dropped. We weren't talking. We were just watching the loading bar on his laptop. When it hit 100%, the screen filled with a directory that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just about kids buying essays anymore. The endowment quid pro quo. There were scanned copies of private contracts labeled confidential, Sterling/Thorne Development Agreement. It detailed a donation of $2 million from Julian Thorne's father for the new Thorne Athletic Center. But the fine print was the killer. In exchange for the donation, the school guaranteed Julian's GPA would never dip below a 3.9, and the school's admissions liaison would personally handle all communication with Harvard to ensure his acceptance. It wasn't a gift, it was a purchase order for a future. The grade leveling algorithm. This was the most sinister. A leaked internal software manual showed a program used by the registrar's office. It was designed to normalize the curve. But normalize was a euphemism for protect. If a student from a high donor family was failing, the algorithm would automatically shave points off the scholarship students' kids like Leo to artificially inflate the top tier without raising the school's overall average too suspiciously. The principal's black ledger. A series of encrypted emails from Principal Sterling's personal account. They weren't to parents. They were to the college board representatives and independent proctors. They were records of consultation fees paid out of the school's own general fund. The school was using tuition money to bribe officials to look the other way while their golden kids cheated. They didn't just let it happen, I whispered, staring at the screen. They built the machine that did it. Leo didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. You can't have a circle of excellence without someone to draw the circle. And Sterling? He's been the one holding the compass for 15 years. The response from the administration was swift, brutal, and entirely predictable. They didn't address the content of the leaks. They didn't apologize. Instead, they went on a hunt. By 8 a.m. on Tuesday, the school felt like a police state. Actual police officers, not just the school's private security, were stationed at every exit. They weren't there to investigate the fraud, they were there to investigate the cyberterrorism. Principal Sterling called an emergency faculty meeting, but the students were already ahead of them. We were organized. We were angry. But we were also scared. Because the Sterling Standard had a new motto, find the leaker. During third period history, the classroom door didn't just open, it was shoved. Two plainclothes detectives and the school's head of security, a man named Miller who looked like he'd been carved out of granite, walked in. Leo Vance. Miller barked. Leo wasn't related to Maya, a common name, but the irony was noted. Leo stood up slowly. He didn't look rattled. He looked like he had been expecting this since he was 6 years old. Pack your things, Leo, Miller said. Principal's office. Now. The room was deathly quiet as Leo shoved his laptop into his bag. He looked at me for a split second, a look that said don't stop, before he was marched out of the room like a high-value prisoner. The narrative was already being spun. I could see it in the eyes of the teachers. Leo was the scholarship kid. The tech whiz. The resentful outsider who had the skills and the motive to hack the principal's private server. He was the perfect villain. If they could pin it on him, they could claim the documents were manipulated by a disgruntled student. They could save the institution by sacrificing the boy. I couldn't just sit there. I knew Leo. He was brilliant, yes. He was cynical, absolutely. But he was also a perfectionist. He wouldn't have left a trail. And yet, Miller had walked straight to his desk. I skipped my next 3 classes and hid in the media lab, using my old login from when I was on the school paper. I needed to see what they saw. I began digging into the school's internal network logs, something Leo had taught me how to do months ago when we were bored. That's when I saw the first ugly truth of the day. The hack wasn't a hack. According to the server logs, the files hadn't been pulled from the outside. They hadn't been breached by a sophisticated piece of malware or a phishing scam. The access logs showed that the architecture of the Lie folder had been accessed using a master key, a physical hardware token that only 3 people possessed: the principal, the head of IT, and the chairman of the board. And the timestamp of the access? It was 4:45 p.m. on Monday. 15 minutes before the leak went live. At 4:45 p.m., Leo had been sitting in the library with me. I had seen his hands. He wasn't on the school network. He was on a private VPN. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were framing him. They didn't just want a scapegoat, they had manufactured the evidence to create one. But why? If the principal was the one whose secrets were being leaked, why would his master key be the one used to pull the files? I made my way toward the administrative wing. The hallway was blocked off, but I knew the service tunnels from the theater department. I crawled through the dusty, cramped ductwork until I was directly above Principal Sterling's inner sanctum. Through the vent, I could hear voices. "He's not talking," Miller's voice growled. "The kid is a stone wall. He says he has an alibi for the timestamp." "It doesn't matter," Sterling snapped. His voice sounded frantic, the cool veneer completely evaporated. "The logs show his MAC address was associated with the master key's login. We planted the digital footprint. The police will take his laptop, find the mirrored files, and that's the end of it. We frame it as a sophisticated forgery by a student with a grudge." "And the board?" Miller asked. "The board is terrified," Sterling said. "They'll sign off on anything that keeps their names out of the headlines. We just need to make Leo the face of the scandal. The Sterling Heights hacker. It's a better story than the Sterling Heights bribery ring." I felt sick. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly knocked over a flashlight. But then, a third voice spoke. A voice I knew. "You're being sloppy, Arthur." It was Maya Vance. I peered through the slats of the vent. Maya was standing by the window, her back to the men. She looked different. The brittle, broken girl from the library was gone. She looked in control. "Maya, stay out of this," Sterling said. "We are trying to save your future." "My future was gone the moment you used my name in that ledger," Maya said, turning around. She held up a small, silver USB drive. "You think Leo was the only one who saw the rot? You think I didn't notice when my essays started coming from your office instead of my father's consultants?" Sterling went pale. "What are you talking about?" "The second leak didn't come from Leo," Maya said, her voice a cold, sharp blade. "It came from me. I used your master key when you were at the Winter Gala. I didn't just pull the circle files. I pulled the disposal protocol." Sterling's eyes went wide. "Maya, you don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy yourself, too." "I was destroyed the second I became a brand for this school," Maya said. "But Leo? He's actually a genius. He didn't leak the files. He just built the platform for me to do it. If you send him to jail, I'll release the third folder. And that one has the names of the judges and the senators you've been donating to." The room was silent. The power dynamic of the school had shifted in an instant. The icon of the school was now its primary blackmailer. But I knew Sterling. He was a cornered rat, and cornered rats bite. He looked at Miller. A silent communication passed between them. Miller started to move toward Maya. "I wouldn't," Maya said, holding her phone up. "This is a live-streamed audio feed. 500 students are listening to this right now. Including the police officers in the hallway." The door to the office burst open. Not the police. Not the board. It was Sarah and a dozen other students, phones held high like torches. "Let him go," Sarah said, her voice steady and full of a power that no GPA could ever provide. The ugly truth wasn't just about the scandal anymore. It was about the war. The students of Sterling Heights weren't just the victims of the system, they were becoming the demolition crew. Leo was released an hour later, but the hacker label stuck in the official news reports. The school was officially closed indefinitely for an investigation. As we walked out of the gates for what might be the last time, Leo looked at me. He looked tired. "It's not over," he said. "Maya saved you," I said. "She took them down." Leo shook his head, looking back at the ivy-covered towers. "She didn't take them down. She just took over. Didn't you hear her? She has the third folder. She's not looking for justice, she's looking for leverage." The scandal didn't rock the school, it just changed who owns the Sterling Standard. I looked at Maya Vance, standing on the steps, surrounded by cameras. She wasn't a pariah anymore. She was a leader. But as the sun set behind her, her shadow grew long and dark, stretching across the courtyard until it touched us all. The glass pedestal was gone, but the shards were being used to build a new, even sharper throne. The iron gates of Sterling Heights High were wrapped in heavy, industrial chains by Wednesday morning. To the local news crews parked on the curb, the school looked like a crime scene. To those of us who had spent 4 years within its suffocating embrace, it looked like a tomb. But as Leo and I sat in a dimly lit corner of the Inkwell, a grimy 24-hour diner 3 miles away from the posh neighborhood of the Heights, we knew the body wasn't dead yet. It was just being moved to a different grave. Leo's laptop had been seized by the police, but the school's IT department didn't realize he had a secondary, air-gapped rig hidden in the ceiling tiles of the media lab. He had retrieved it during the chaos of the evacuation. Now, he sat across from me, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his glasses like a digital fever. "They aren't investigating the fraud," Leo said, his voice flat. "I've been monitoring the Board of Trustees' private Slack channel. They aren't talking about Maya, or Julian, or the Sats. They're talking about the Phoenix Project." "What is the Phoenix Project?" I asked, pushing aside a plate of untouched fries. "It's a pivot," Leo explained, his fingers flying across the keys. "Sterling Heights High is a toxic brand now. The lawsuits are going to pile up. So, the board is planning to declare the school insolvent, dissolve the nonprofit status, and sell the assets, the campus, the patents, the staff to a new private entity called the Sterling Global Initiative." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's air conditioning. "They're just going to change the name and keep going." "Worse," Leo muttered. "Look at this." He turned the screen toward me. It was a PDF labeled Yield Management Strategy, Q4. It didn't look like a school document. It looked like a prospectus for a hedge fund. This was the ugly truth I had suspected but never dared to name. The scandal wasn't a breach of the system, it was the system. The documents showed that 5 years ago, Sterling Heights had faced a financial crisis. To maintain its #1 national ranking and attract the billion-dollar endowments from families like the Thorns, the school had transitioned to a guaranteed excellence model. It was an institutional mandate. The teachers weren't just pressured to give better grades, they were contractually obligated to ensure that high-value students, a term used in the documents for donor kids, maintained a minimum GPA. The grade-buying ring we had discovered wasn't a secret underground operation run by Maya Vance. It was a service provided by the school itself. The ghost writers weren't random freelancers, they were graduate students on Sterling Heights scholarships whose tuition was paid in exchange for academic support services for the elite. The school was a closed-loop system of corruption. They recruited the brilliant but poor to do the work, and then sold that work to the mediocre but rich. "It's a factory," I whispered. They weren't just helping Maya cheat. They were required to. If Maya didn't get into an Ivy, the valuation of the school would drop, and the board's personal investments would tank. "Exactly," Leo said. "The scandal didn't rock the school. It just threatened the IPO. We couldn't let them just rebrand and walk away. But we needed the physical evidence, the hard copies of the contracts that were kept in the deep vault, a high-security room in the basement of the administrative wing. The digital files were good, but in court, the board would claim they were fabricated by the hacker. We needed the wet ink signatures of the chairman and the principal. "We have to go back in," I said. "The school is guarded by private security 24/7 now," Leo replied. "And they're looking for me." "They aren't looking for me," I said. "I'm the quiet girl who never caused trouble. And I know the layout better than anyone because of my time on the yearbook staff." We waited until 2 a.m. The campus was bathed in the eerie glow of security floodlights. We bypassed the main gate, sliding through a gap in the fence near the athletic fields. The air was cold and heavy with the scent of wet pine and old secrets. As we reached the side entrance of the admin building, Leo plugged a small device into the card reader. "This should spoof the master key for 30 seconds, he whispered. The light turned green. We were in. The hallways of Sterling Heights felt different at night. The portraits of past graduates seemed to watch us with judgmental eyes. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. We made our way to the basement, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The deep vault was behind a heavy steel door. Leo spent 10 minutes bypassing the biometric lock while I stood watch, my heart hammering against my ribs. When the door finally hissed open, we didn't find a room full of gold. We found rows and rows of filing cabinets. I pulled open the drawer labeled Trustee Correspondence. I found it. A leather-bound folder embossed with the school's crest. Inside was the Phoenix Project Master Plan, signed by the chairman of the board Julian Thorne's father and, to my horror, a representative from the State Department of Education. The lie went all the way to the top. This wasn't just a school scandal. It was a state-level racketeering scheme. But there was something else in the folder. A smaller, blue envelope. I opened it and felt the world tilt on its axis. It was a contract for Maya Vance. Not for her grades. It was a non-disclosure and future employment agreement. It was dated before the Winter Gala. "Leo," I hissed. "Look at this." Maya hadn't leaked the files because she wanted justice. She had leaked them because the board had hired her to do it. The first leak, the one that destroyed the students' reputations, was a controlled demolition. By leaking the student-level cheating first, the board had created a distraction. They let Maya expose the kids so that everyone would be too busy hating the rich cheaters to look at the institutional mandate. Maya wasn't the whistleblower, she was the cleanup crew. She was burning down the house to hide the bodies in the basement. It's a beautiful plan, isn't it? We spun around. Standing in the doorway of the vault was Maya Vance. She wasn't wearing a hoodie this time. She was back in her designer blazer, her hair perfectly coiffed, a small, elegant pistol held loosely in her hand. "Maya," Leo said, stepping in front of me. "You're working for them." "I'm working for me, Leo," Maya said, her voice smooth and cold. "The board offered me a deal. I destroy the circle of excellence, I become the face of the reform, and in exchange, my record is wiped clean and I get a full ride to Oxford through the new Global Initiative Scholarship. Everyone gets what they want. The school gets a fresh start, and the bad apples get expelled. And the kids whose lives you ruined?" I asked, clutching the blue envelope. "Sarah? Julian? The scholarship students whose grades were normalized into the trash." Maya sighed, a sound of genuine pity. "Some people are just the price of admission. You of all people should understand that, Fujino. You've always been a student of the ugly truth." "We have the physical contracts, Maya," I said, holding them up. "The ones with the board's signatures. Your clean start is about to get very messy." Maya smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Do you really think I'd let you get this far if I didn't want you to?" Suddenly, the lights in the vault slammed on. Behind Maya, the head of security, Miller, appeared with 3 other men. The hacker and his accomplice, caught breaking into the school vault to destroy evidence, Maya said, Practicing the headline. It's a tragic end to a complicated story. She didn't pull the trigger. Instead, Miller stepped forward, his hand outstretched for the documents. But I didn't give them to him. I looked at Leo. He gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. I didn't try to run. I didn't try to fight. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "You're right, Maya," I said. "I am a student of the truth. And I learned from the best. I'm not streaming this to the students. I'm streaming this directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's tip line. And since I'm a minor being threatened with a firearm on school property, I think they're going to find this institutional mandate very interesting." Outside, in the distance, we heard it. The low, rhythmic wail of sirens. Not the local police. Not the school security. The architecture of the lie was finally being condemned. The glass pedestal hadn't just shattered, it was being ground into dust. "What have you done?" Maya whispered, the pistol trembling in her hand. "I finished the assignment," I said. The fourth chapter ended not with a bang, but with the sound of the world finally, painfully, waking up. The sirens didn't sound like a rescue, they sounded like a funeral dirge for the Sterling Standard. As the federal agents swarmed the administrative wing, the world within the vault seemed to freeze. The blue and red light strobe flashed against the cold steel cabinets, turning Maya Vance's face into a rhythmic mask of terror and fury. The small, elegant pistol in her hand suddenly looked like a toy, a pathetic, desperate prop in a play that had already been cancelled. "Drop it!" a voice boomed. It wasn't the school security. It was a tactical team, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like white-hot blades. Maya's hand trembled. For a second, I thought she might actually pull the trigger, not at us, but as a final, dramatic exit. But the icon of the Heights was, above all else, a pragmatist. The gun clattered onto the concrete floor. "I had a deal," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was supposed to be the survivor." "In a controlled demolition, Maya," Leo said, his voice steady even as an agent pushed him toward the wall for safety, "the only thing that survives is the rubble. You were never a partner. You were just the last piece of evidence they needed to burn." The next 72 hours were a blur of flashbulbs, depositions, and the sound of a legacy disintegrating in real time. By Wednesday afternoon, the Sterling Global Initiative, the board's desperate attempt to rebrand the corruption, was dead on arrival. The FBI hadn't just found the architecture of the lie folder, they had found the physical paper trail we had pulled from the vault. The master key logs, the yield management strategy, and the signed contracts with the Department of Education provided enough evidence for a massive RICO indictment. Principal Arthur Sterling was the first to go. The image of him being led out of his office in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face hidden behind a briefcase, became the defining photo of the decade for our town. He didn't look like a leader anymore. He looked like a frightened middle manager caught stealing from the till. Then came the board. Julian Thorne's father was arrested at a private airfield while attempting to board a jet to the Cayman Islands. The Thorne Athletic Center was immediately seized as part of the asset forfeiture. They began chipping his name off the cornerstone of the library by Friday morning. But the most brutal fallout wasn't legal, it was social. The circle of excellence didn't just break, it evaporated. Every Ivy League acceptance letter for a Sterling Heights senior was put on hold. The guaranteed excellence model had poisoned the well for everyone. It didn't matter if you had actually stayed up until 4 a.m. studying or if you had bought your way in, the Sterling name was now a scarlet letter. I saw Julian Thorne one last time. He was sitting on the curb outside the locked school gates, his varsity jacket stripped of its patches. He looked at me, or rather, he looked through me. "My dad said it was an investment," Julian muttered, his eyes glazed. "He said he was just making sure the market didn't fail me. Now I don't even have a high school diploma." I'm 19 years old and I'm a footnote in a federal investigation. I didn't have any words for him. There was no comfort for a boy whose entire identity had been purchased on a credit card that had finally been declined. Maya Vance didn't go to jail, not yet. Her deal with the board was used against her, but her cooperation with the FBI provided her with a shred of immunity. However, the court of public opinion was far less lenient. The video of the vault confrontation, the one I had streamed, went viral. The world didn't see a whistleblower. They saw a girl who was willing to sell out her classmates to save her own skin. I found her packing her locker a week later, under the supervision of a federal marshal. The school was officially closed, its halls empty and echoing. "You won, Fujino," she said, not looking at me. She was holding a framed photo of herself at the Winter Gala. She looked at it for a moment, then dropped it into a trash can. The glass shattered. "You and Leo got your ugly truth. I hope you like the taste of it." "It doesn't taste like anything, Maya," I replied. "It just feels like the fever finally broke. You could have been anything. You were the smartest person in the room, and you didn't even trust yourself enough to write your own essays." "I was what they made me," she snapped, her eyes finally meeting mine. There was a flicker of the old Maya there, the sharp, dangerous fire, but it was dying out. I was a brand. And brands don't have souls. They just have market value. She walked out of the Gothic arches of Sterling Heights for the last time, her head held high, though she was walking into a void where her future used to be. Sterling Heights High was never reopened. The building was eventually sold to the county and turned into a public community college. The ivy was stripped from the walls, revealing the gray, weathered stone beneath. It looked more honest that way. Leo and I ended up at a state university. No endowments, no circle of excellence, just crowded lecture halls and cheap coffee. On our last night before leaving town, we sat on the hill overlooking the old campus. The Sterling Standard was gone, but the lessons remained. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked, looking at the dark silhouette of the towers. The scandal rocked everything. Some kids who were actually innocent lost their scholarships because the funding dried up. The town's reputation is in the dirt. Leo adjusted his glasses and looked at his laptop, a new one, bought with money from a legitimate tech internship. "The truth is a forest fire, Fujino. It's ugly, it's destructive, and it kills a lot of things. But without it, the soil never clears. The old growth was choking us. Now, at least, something real can grow." I looked down at my hands. I wasn't the quiet girl anymore. I was the one who had helped pull the trigger on the most prestigious institution in the state. I realized then that the ugly truth wasn't just about the cheating or the bribes. The real scandal was that we had all agreed to the lie. We had all wanted the pedestal to be real so badly that we ignored the sound of the glass cracking beneath our feet. The Sterling Heights scandal didn't just rock our high school. It broke the mirror we were using to hide from ourselves. And as I looked out at the horizon, I realized that for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't afraid of the shards. I was just glad to be standing on solid ground.